She pointed straight at me, her pearls glinting under the afternoon sun, and screamed, "Get out of my sight, you fat, silly black thing!" Her voice carried across the cathedral courtyard, echoing against the stone walls. Gasps rippled through the guests standing on the marble steps. Some looked away in embarrassment. Others whispered behind gloved hands. And my husband? He stood there, frozen, saying nothing, just like he always did. Then, just as the silence grew unbearable, we heard it. The deep, steady hum of an approaching engine. Heads turned. A sleek black limousine rolled to a stop right in front of the church. The chauffeur stepped out, crisp in his tailored uniform, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Madam Matthews, your delegation from London is waiting. Shall we proceed?" You should have seen her face. All that pride, all that venom, gone in an instant. Ruth Barker, the woman who'd spent months trying to humiliate me, looked like she'd seen a ghost. Before we begin, welcome back to the Powder Room Tales, where unforgettable stories are crafted with you in mind. If you're new here, make sure to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. New York, London, Chicago, wherever you are. May peace and favor be your portion today. Because today's story is something you won't forget for a long time. Because this isn't your average mother-in-law story. This is a story about quiet strength, cruel words, and a lesson learned in the most public way possible. If you love a good story where the underdog wins without raising her voice, hit that like button right now, because this is about to get real. Before we get into that moment outside the cathedral, I need to take you back to where it all began, long before the limousine, long before the stairs, and long before Ruth Barker decided I wasn't good enough for her precious son. 3 years ago, I met David Burnett at a charity art auction in downtown Chicago. I remember it like yesterday, a quiet winter evening, the kind where the city lights look like stars reflected on glass. I was standing near one of my own architectural exhibits, pretending to be just another admirer, when he walked up beside me. He was polite, kind, and completely unaware that the anonymous donor funding half the event was me. We talked about design cities and what made a place feel like home. He had this thoughtful calm about him, the kind that draws you in without trying. He didn't see a CEO or an architect that night. He saw a woman who loved what she did, and I liked that. You see, at that time, I was running KMA Architects, one of the fastest growing design firms in Chicago. We just finished 2 major projects in Ghana and Dubai, and my name was quietly making rounds in the industry. But I'd learned my lesson the hard way, that when some people find out you're successful, they stop seeing you and start seeing your bank balance. So, with David, I kept things simple. He thought I was just a project designer for a local housing nonprofit. And honestly, I let him think that. Our love story grew from simplicity, long walks by Lake Michigan, weekends spent at flea markets, and takeout dinners on the couch. It was peaceful, uncomplicated. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to perform. When he proposed, it wasn't in Paris or some luxury restaurant. It was on a rainy Tuesday in our favorite cafe with a modest silver ring he'd saved up for. I remember the warmth of his hand shaking when he said, "Kate, you make me feel like I'm finally home." And I cried real tears, because this man didn't know that I could buy the cafe we were sitting in, and he loved me anyway. That's when I thought I'd found something real, something pure. But that was before I met her. Ruth Barker Burnett, David's mother, the widow of a senator, the matriarch of a family that had been old money since the 1800s, the kind of woman who didn't need to raise her voice to make everyone else lower theirs. The first dinner at her mansion felt like walking into a museum. Every corner was polished to perfection. Paintings of ancestors lined the walls, all pale faces in gold frames, staring down at me like silent judges. I wore my best navy dress and brought a bouquet of lilies, I wanted to make a good impression. Ruth opened the door herself. She gave me one long look, from my braids to my shoes, and smiled that kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Oh, you're darker than I expected," she said softly, as if she was commenting on the weather. David's nervous chuckle filled the silence. "Mom, this is Kate." She tilted her head. "I can see that. Well, do come in. We're not used to outsiders." Her voice was honeyed poison. The table was set like something out of a royal banquet. Crystal, silverware, and floral arrangements tall enough to block conversation. Her friends were there too. 4 older women in pearls and designer dresses, all perfectly polite, all watching me with the kind of curiosity you reserve for an unexpected stain on fine fabric. Throughout dinner, Ruth asked about my little design projects. When I said I worked in architecture, she laughed softly. "Oh, so you're a decorator then? That's adorable." I smiled, but inside I could feel my chest tightening. "Something like that," I said. The conversation turned to family, travel, and legacy. Topics designed to remind me exactly where I didn't belong. And yet, through it all, David stayed quiet, trying to keep the peace, trying not to upset his mother. When dessert came, Ruth glanced at my plate and said, "You have a lovely face, dear. Have you ever tried intermittent fasting? It's very fashionable these days." Her friends giggled behind their napkins. That was the first night I understood the type of woman I was dealing with. Ruth Barker didn't just dislike me. She resented me. My skin, my curves, my silence. Everything about me was a threat to the image she'd built around her family. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was strong enough to rise above it. But what I didn't know then was that silence can only last so long before it demands to be broken. Because one day, I was going to stand in front of her, and she would finally see me for who I really was. When David suggested we stay with his mother just for a few months while our new home was being renovated, I said yes, mostly to make him happy. What he didn't know was that the house wasn't being renovated. It was being built from scratch. A 7-bedroom eco-modern estate on 30 acres outside the city. My design, my money, my vision. But to keep my secret, I nodded and smiled. "Sure, honey. It'll be nice to bond with your mom." Nice. That was the last word anyone should ever use to describe living with Ruth Barker. The first morning, I woke up to the sound of classical music blaring through the hallways. I found Ruth in the kitchen, dressed in a silk robe, stirring her coffee like royalty. "Good morning," I said, smiling. She looked up slowly. "Oh, you're awake. I was wondering if you'd be up before noon. David does like an early riser." "It's 7, I said, checking my phone. "Yes," she replied, lips curling. "Some of us have been up since 5. Discipline builds character, you know." She said it like a teacher correcting a lazy student. David walked in seconds later, kissed his mother's cheek, and poured coffee. "Morning, Mom." "Morning, Kate." "Morning," I said softly. Ruth smiled at him, then turned back to me. "I was just telling Kate how wonderful it is to have her here. The house has been so quiet lately, though I do worry she'll get bored." "I won't," I said. "I have a few projects I'm working on remotely." Her eyebrows lifted. "Projects? Oh, you mean those little drawings you do?" David coughed lightly. "Mom, it's fine," I interrupted, forcing a smile. "Yes, those little drawings. That became our pattern. Every day, a new test. Every meal, a new performance. If I cooked, it was too spicy. If I cleaned, it was too casual. If I worked, it was too obsessive." "You're always on that laptop," she'd say. "A proper wife knows how to keep a home, not just stare at a screen." She had no idea that while she thought I was scrolling, I was finalizing a $90 million contract for a Dubai high-rise. I'd take business calls from the car parked 2 streets away so she wouldn't hear the investors calling me Madam Matthews. Every insult she gave me, I swallowed whole. Every jab about my weight or race, I tucked away somewhere deep, pretending it didn't hurt. But at night, lying beside David, I could feel the distance growing. He'd wrap his arm around me and whisper, "She doesn't mean it, Katie. She's just old-fashioned." I wanted to believe that. But how do you excuse cruelty simply because it's dressed in age and money? The worst moments weren't the insults, they were the whispers. Ruth loved hosting her ladies' teas, weekly gatherings with her friends from the Maplewood Heritage Society. I'd walk past the sitting room and hear the laughter. Then, my name. "She's really trying, bless her heart," one woman would say, and Ruth's voice would follow, dripping with sugar and poison. "Yes, she means well. She's just not what I pictured for David, but he's always been charitable." The room would fill with polite chuckles, porcelain cups clinking against saucers. Charitable. That word stung worse than any insult. I stopped going downstairs during her events. I stopped trying to win her approval. Instead, I buried myself in my designs. My work was my sanctuary, the one place where I still felt like myself. But one afternoon, Ruth crossed a line I didn't think she would. I was sketching on my tablet in the living room when she walked in, holding a stack of mail. "This came for you," she said, tossing an envelope onto the coffee table. I glanced at it. "KMA Holdings Confidential." My heart skipped. "Oh, that's—" Her eyes narrowed. "KMA Holdings? Sounds important." "It's just business," I said quickly, reaching for it. She held it just out of reach. "Funny, dear. For someone who claims to work for a nonprofit, you seem to get a lot of mail from holdings and executives. May I have it, please?" She smirked, clearly enjoying my discomfort, then finally handed it over. "Of course. I'm sure it's nothing extravagant." Her tone made it sound like a sin to be successful. I took the envelope, thanked her, and walked away. But inside, something in me began to shift. I realized that day that no matter what I did, how gentle, how respectful, how patient, I would never be enough for Ruth Barker. Not because of what I'd done, but because of who I was. A week later, she called for a family dinner. She said she wanted to celebrate togetherness, but I knew Ruth never did anything without an audience. The table shimmered under crystal light. Her friends were there again, smiling those perfect social smiles. Halfway through the meal, she looked at my plate and said, "You have such a pretty face, Kate. You'd be stunning if you just lost a bit of, you know." Her tone was soft. The cruelty wasn't. The room went quiet. I smiled, placed my fork down, and said, "You're right, Ruth. Maybe I should. But until then, I'll just keep feeding my self-worth instead." Her expression faltered, just for a second. David looked between us, unsure who to defend. He chose silence. Again. That night, as I lay awake, I decided something. I would never raise my voice at Ruth Barker. I would never argue with her again. But one day, I would make her listen, without saying a single word. If Ruth's mansion had a heart, it beat inside the ballroom. Gold mirrors, velvet curtains, portraits of ancestors who never smiled. Every inch of that place whispered old money and older pride. She loved showing it off. Every weekend, she hosted luncheons, teas, fundraisers, anything that let her name glide off other people's tongues. Mrs. Ruth Barker Burnett. Even saying it made her sit straighter. And to her, I was the stain on her porcelain world. One evening, as the fall leaves began to turn gold, Ruth announced she was planning an evening of culture and refinement. Translation: another excuse to parade her wealth. "I'm hosting the Heritage Fund Gala next Saturday," she said at dinner, slicing into her salmon. It's an exclusive event. The mayor will be attending, along with the Chamber of Commerce and a few notable families. It's a wonderful opportunity for our family to shine. David looked up. That sounds amazing, Mom. Kate and I could help with— Oh, no, dear, Ruth interrupted smoothly. You and I will handle the guests. Kate can assist in other ways. My fork paused midair. Assist? Her eyes flicked to my face, then to my body, as if evaluating a piece of furniture that didn't quite match the decor. Yes, you have such a practical presence. Maybe help coordinate the catering staff. Ensure everything runs smoothly. David's brow furrowed. Mom, Kate's my wife, not your event planner. She smiled that perfect social smile. Oh, I didn't mean it that way, darling. But these galas are very refined affairs. And sometimes, well, blending in is an art form. I knew what she meant. I'd heard it in the way her friends lowered their voices when I entered a room. I'd seen it in the way their eyes scanned my skin, my curves, my every movement, as though I were an unexpected guest at the wrong address. Later that night, David tried to console me. She's just set in her ways, he said softly, brushing his thumb over my hand. She's cruel, David, I whispered, and you keep letting her be. He exhaled, frustrated. You want me to go to war with my mother? I want you to have a spine. The silence that followed was louder than any argument. That week, the house became a storm of preparations. Florists came and went. Caterers carried silver trays and gossip. Ruth barked orders like a general before battle. Every day she found a way to humiliate me. Small, cutting things, disguised as etiquette. Darling, the help will need instruction. You do know how to fold napkins properly, don't you? I'd avoid wearing bright colors on Saturday. Cameras can be unkind. She was relentless, but I stayed calm, smiling, observing, because beneath all that pearl and posture, Ruth Barker had a fatal flaw. She underestimated people. She saw humility as weakness. She mistook silence for submission, and that mistake would cost her everything. 2 days before the gala, I received a call in my office downtown. My assistant Leo patched it through. Madam Matthews, he said, your meeting with the London investors is confirmed. They're landing Saturday afternoon. Perfect timing. I swiveled my chair, gazing out at the skyline, one of my skylines. Reschedule their hotel meeting, I said. We'll make it public instead. He paused. Public? Yes. I'll meet them at St. Regis Cathedral. Have the limo and driver ready at 5 sharp. He hesitated for a second, then replied, Understood. I smiled to myself. The stage was already set. Ruth just didn't know it yet. The morning of the gala, Ruth floated around the mansion in a cloud of Chanel perfume and perfection. Her hair was sculpted, her pearls gleaming. She looked like a woman born for spotlights. When I entered the room, she looked me over, unimpressed. Is that what you're wearing? She asked, eyes lingering on my deep blue gown. Yes, I said, unbothered. I designed it myself. Her lips twitched. Of course you did. Behind her, 2 of her friends exchanged glances. One whispered something that made the other giggle. I didn't need to hear it. I'd heard it all before. Ruth stepped closer, her tone sweet as poison. You know, Kate, in our family, presentation matters. Confidence is one thing, but elegance is in knowing your place. I looked her dead in the eye and smiled. Oh, don't worry, Ruth. I know exactly where I belong. She didn't catch the double meaning, but she would soon enough. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stood on the balcony overlooking the glowing city. The cool air brushed against my skin, but my thoughts burned. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the dignity she'd been stripping from me piece by piece. I remembered every insult, every snide whisper, Every time she looked at me like I was a mistake her son refused to undo. I whispered to the night, "You've had your stage, Ruth. Now it's my turn." Down below, the limo I'd requested gleamed under the moonlight. The driver was already rehearsing his role for the next day. Formal, precise, respectful. Everything would unfold exactly as planned. And when that engine roared to life outside St. Regis Cathedral, Ruth Barker's perfect world would finally crack. The day of the cathedral wedding was radiant, the kind of morning that promised grace but delivered storms. Sunlight spilled over the city like melted gold. The St. Regis Cathedral gleamed, its marble steps crowded with guests in pastel hats and tailored suits. Cameras flashed. Music floated through the air like champagne bubbles. It was the perfect stage for Ruth Barker Burnett, and, unknowingly, for her downfall. I arrived with David, wearing the cobalt blue gown that had made Ruth's lips tighten the moment she saw it. The satin hugged me in all the right places, its shimmer catching the light like ocean waves. Behind her designer sunglasses, Ruth's eyes sharpened. "Too bold," she murmured. "Blue makes you look heavier." I smiled, calm. "Then I'll be impossible to miss." She scoffed softly. "Oh, you won't be. I'll see to that." Her words slithered through the air, subtle enough for others to miss, sharp enough for me to feel. David adjusted his tie, pretending not to hear. His silence echoed louder than the church bells. Inside, the ceremony unfolded like a movie scene Ruth had written for herself. She greeted every guest by name, kissed cheeks, and laughed in the lilting tone of someone who believed herself untouchable. I stood beside David, quiet, observant, her invisible audience. When the service ended, the guests flowed outside where photographers waited to capture the perfect Burnett family moment. That's when Ruth saw her opportunity. She reached for David's arm. "Come, darling, let's have a few photos for the papers." Her gaze flicked to me. "Kate, dear, perhaps you could stand to the side for now. The Burnett legacy photos are rather traditional." Gasps fluttered among a few nearby guests. David frowned. "Mom," she raised a manicured hand. "Please, David, I'm just trying to protect our family's image." "I'm sure Kate understands." I smiled faintly. "Oh, I understand perfectly." She turned, facing the crowd. Her stage at last. "Everyone," she said with a brittle laugh, "you know how it is with these modern marriages. Sometimes our sons bring home surprises." Her friends tittered, the laughter polite but uneasy. Then her tone hardened. "And some surprises don't quite fit." Her eyes locked on mine, gleaming with malicious triumph. "Get out of my sight, you fat, silly black thing." It hit like a whip crack. The crowd fell dead silent. A single camera flash went off, the cruel kind that freezes humiliation forever. David's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes darted between us, torn and afraid. Ruth stood there, proud, her chin high, her pearls gleaming in the sunlight. I felt every gaze on me, shock, pity, disgust, and yet I didn't flinch, because I knew something Ruth didn't. I knew what was coming. Then, a sound, low at first, like distant thunder, then louder, closer, deeper. The growl of an engine rolled through the street. Heads turned. A sleek black limousine glided to a stop at the cathedral steps, polished so bright the crowd's reflections danced across its surface. The driver stepped out, immaculate in his black suit, cap gleaming under the sun. He opened the rear door and bowed. "Madam Matthews," he said clearly, his voice slicing through the stunned silence. "The delegation from London is waiting. Shall we proceed?" Ruth's face drained of color. Madam, who?" she stammered. I didn't answer immediately. I just turned, slow and steady, letting the moment breathe, letting every eye take in what was happening. Then, softly but firmly, I said, "Yes, tell them I'll join in 5 minutes." The driver bowed again. "Very good, madam." The word hung in the air, madam. People whispered. Cameras turned from Ruth to me. A woman in pearls gasped. "Wait, Kate Matthews? From KMA Architects?" Another voice followed. "You mean the one behind the Paris Renewal Project?" Ruth blinked, trembling as realization flooded her face. David stepped forward, eyes wide. "Kate, what's going on?" I looked at him gently, but my voice carried. "What's going on, David, is that your mother just insulted the founder of the company that designed half the buildings she brags about at her charity galas." Ruth's mouth fell open. What are you saying?" "I'm saying, Ruth," I continued, my tone calm but unrelenting, "that while you were teaching me about refinement, I was building empires. The house you live in, the one with your name etched on the gate, it's owned by a KMA trust." Her breath hitched. "That can't be—" "It is," I said simply, "and technically, that means you just screamed at your landlady." A ripple of gasps swept through the guests. Even the photographers lowered their cameras for a moment, unsure whether to shoot or to stare. Ruth staggered back a step, her perfect posture breaking. "Kate, I didn't know—" "No," I said softly. "You didn't want to know." I turned to the chauffeur. "We're leaving." He opened the door. I stepped inside, the cathedral lights glinting off the limo's polished frame. As I settled into the leather seat, I glanced back one last time. Ruth stood frozen, one trembling hand pressed to her pearls, her entire world collapsing around her. The driver closed the door. The sound echoed like the period at the end of a sentence that had been waiting too long to be written. From the tinted glass, I watched as the crowd began to disperse, whispers following Ruth like shadows. And in that moment, I realized something. Power isn't in screaming louder than your enemies. It's in staying silent long enough for your success to speak for you. For a long time, after the limo doors shut, no one moved. Even through the tinted glass, I could see their faces. The shock, the disbelief, the dawning realization that the woman Ruth Barker Burnett had just called a fat, silly black thing was the CEO of one of the most powerful architectural firms in the world. Ruth stood alone at the top of the cathedral steps, her body rigid, her pearls trembling. Her circle of friends, those polished, perfumed loyalists, shifted uneasily. A few whispered. One woman lowered her eyes, ashamed to even be associated with the moment. Then came the first phone flash, then another, then the reporters, sensing blood in the water. In seconds, what Ruth had tried to hide for decades, her cruelty, her elitism, her prejudice, was now being documented by every smartphone in sight. Inside the limo, the driver asked gently, "Shall I proceed, ma'am?" I took a slow breath, straightened my shoulders, and nodded. "Drive." The engine hummed to life. As we pulled away, I caught a final glimpse of Ruth through the rear window. Small, shaking, her empire of appearances collapsing brick by brick. David was still standing beside her, eyes wide, caught between shame and confusion. He didn't follow me. Not yet. The drive to the board meeting felt surreal, quiet, powerful, cleansing. My assistant Leo met me outside the hotel, a tablet in hand and that proud little smile he always tried to hide. "Everything's ready, Madam Matthews," he said softly. "The London investors are waiting in the boardroom. Oh, and CNN just picked up a video clip from the cathedral." I froze mid-step. "Already?" "Yes," he replied. "It's everywhere." I inhaled deeply. "Then let's make sure what they see next is exactly who I am." The meeting lasted an hour. Contracts were signed. Hands were shaken. The investors congratulated me, not just for the deal, but for the courageous composure they'd seen online. They didn't see a scandal. They saw power handled with grace. By the time I left the building, the internet had done its work. #Madam Matthews was trending. Clips of Ruth's insult and my limo arrival were all over social media. Some users called it the most satisfying karma ever caught on camera. Others called it a modern fairy tale, the revenge of elegance. But I didn't feel victorious, not yet. That night, I sat by the window of my penthouse suite overlooking the city. Lights sparkled below like tiny galaxies, many of them glowing from towers I designed myself. My phone buzzed with hundreds of messages, journalists, colleagues, old friends, and then one name appeared on the screen. David. I hesitated before answering. His voice was shaky. Kate, what did I just see? I stared out the window. You saw what your mother made everyone else see. He exhaled, almost a sob. Why didn't you tell me who you really were? Would it have changed how you loved me? I asked softly. There was a long silence. I don't know. That's why, I whispered. He arrived an hour later, unannounced, eyes red, tie loosened, the weight of his mother's actions pressing down on him. He stood in the doorway, unsure if he was welcome. Kate, she's broken, he said quietly. She hasn't stopped crying. I turned to face him. And did she cry when she called me worthless? When she humiliated me in front of strangers? When she taught you silence? He swallowed hard. No. Then she's not broken, David, I said evenly. She's finally seeing herself. He walked closer, voice trembling. I should have defended you. I should have. Yes, I interrupted softly. You should have. The honesty cut him deeper than anger ever could. He sat down across from me, defeated. What happens now? I looked at him for a long moment before answering. Now, I said, I rebuild my peace. The house your mother lives in, the one under KMA Holdings, I'll be transferring it back to her name, but the condition will be simple. She'll never contact me again. His head snapped up. You're giving it back? I'm not her jailer, David. I'm not her revenge. My tone softened. She already has to live with what she did, in public, for the world to see. I don't need to take her house. She's already lost her home. The next morning, the tabloid screamed, Socialite Ruth Barker Burnett humiliated by daughter-in-law CEO. The day power changed hands outside a cathedral. Ruth's friends began distancing themselves immediately. Her social invitations disappeared overnight. The charity boards quietly asked for her resignation. The same society that once worshipped her pedigree now whispered about her prejudice. And me, I didn't gloat, I didn't post, I didn't speak, because I didn't need to. The world had written the ending for me, and it was far louder than anything I could have said. But behind the victory, a small ache lingered. The ache of what could have been, a family built on respect instead of pride. Late that night, as I looked at my reflection in the glass, I whispered to myself, you didn't win by hurting her, Kate. You won by not becoming her. And for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. 3 days passed before Ruth Barker Burnett broke her silence. The world had turned her name into a headline, a warning wrapped in scandal. Every news channel replayed the same moment, her words echoing like poison, my calm silence. And then that black limousine gliding in like judgment. Evening talk shows dissected it. Commentators called it a cultural reset. But for Ruth, it was devastation. She stopped answering calls. The mansion lights stayed off. The curtains stayed drawn. David visited her twice, both times returning pale and shaken. She's not herself, he murmured one night. She doesn't even look at me. She just stares at the news. I listen quietly, the weight of pity fighting with the memory of pain. And then, on the fourth day, a courier brought a single cream envelope. No logo, no stamp, just my name written in Ruth's elegant handwriting, Catherine Matthews Burnett. I didn't open it immediately. It sat on my desk for hours as I worked, sketching outlines for a new cultural center in Nairobi, but my hand kept drifting toward it, tracing the ink, feeling the ghost of her authority still trying to hold shape. Finally, that night I broke the seal. The letter aside was written on the thick stationery. Her penmanship was steady but faint, like the voice of someone who'd been crying for days. It read, Kate, there are moments when the mirror finally tells the truth, and it is not a sight one forgets. I saw mine that day on the cathedral steps. I saw the ugliness of my pride reflected in the face of the woman I had wronged most. I spent my life confusing class with character, etiquette with empathy, and tradition with truth. You stood before me with more grace and silence than I have shown in a lifetime of words. I do not expect your forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But I hope you will one day remember me not as a monster, but as a foolish old woman who learned too late that power means nothing without kindness. Ruth Barker Burnett. The letter trembled in my hands when I finished reading. For a long time I said nothing. I didn't cry, but something inside me shifted, a door quietly closing, locking the past behind it. Later that evening, David showed up at my apartment again. He looked thinner, older, humbled. She wrote to you too, didn't she? He asked, eyes downcast. I nodded. She did. He hesitated. She keeps asking if I think you'll forgive her. I don't know what to tell her. I sighed, walking to the window. The city lights stretched endlessly, a reminder that life always moves on, even when hearts lag. Tell her, I said slowly, that forgiveness isn't something you demand. It's something you earn, through silence, through change. David nodded, voice low. And us, Kate? Is there forgiveness left for me? I turned, studying him. The man who'd once promised to protect me, yet watched as I was humiliated in public. My voice softened. I don't hate you, David, but I don't trust silence anymore. Not from you. He blinked hard, tears threatening. I'll spend the rest of my life proving you can. Then start, I said. Not with words, with actions. That week, Ruth resigned from all her social boards and charities. The society pages that once worshipped her now whispered her name like an obituary. But quietly, I noticed small changes. Her maid of 20 years called me, voice trembling with emotion. Miss Kate, she said, Mrs. Burnett's been volunteering at the shelter downtown. No cameras, no one knows. Just her. I smiled faintly. Then maybe she's finally meeting herself. A month later, a delivery arrived at my firm, a small velvet box with no note. Inside was a single pearl, just one, not a necklace, not earrings, a lone pearl from the string Ruth had always worn. It wasn't an apology, it was an acknowledgement, and that meant more. That evening, I met Leo in my office to finalize a new project proposal. He caught sight of the pearl on my desk and raised a brow. New design inspiration? I smiled. No, old story. Finally finished. He nodded. Well, Madam Matthews, the Paris Renewal Project team sent their gratitude. They said your resilience inspired their campaign theme, Grace Built in Stone. I laughed softly. I like that. When everyone left, I walked out to the balcony, the night air cool against my skin. Down below, the city pulsed with life. Towers, roads, lights, all pieces of a world I helped build. And somewhere, in a smaller, quieter house, an old woman was learning how to live without hate. I whispered into the wind, Revenge gave me peace for a moment, but grace gave me freedom. Then I turned back to my work, ready to build again. Because some stories don't end in destruction. They end in redemption, quietly, completely, and on our own terms. 6 months later, winter melted into spring, and so did the last traces of bitterness in my heart. The scandal that had once lit up the internet like wildfire had burned itself out. Ruth's name no longer trended, the tabloids had moved on, and life, unpredictable, unbothered, kept going. But some stories don't disappear, they simply evolve. I was in London for the ribbon cutting of a project that had been 2 years in the making, the Global Women's Design Initiative, an architectural hub that trained young women in sustainable urban planning. Standing on stage, microphone in hand, I looked out at the audience of engineers, designers, and students. All women. All brilliant. People will underestimate you, I said, my voice steady but warm. They'll measure your worth by the labels they understand, your size, your color, your accent, your silence. Don't argue with them. Outgrow them. Applause filled the hall. Cameras flashed. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking about fame or recognition. I was thinking about Ruth. Because the irony was poetic. Her cruelty had built the fire that now fueled everything I did, and I turned that fire into light. After the ceremony, my assistant Leo handed me a small envelope. It came through your foundation office, he said, from the States. The handwriting on the front stopped me cold. Ruth. Inside was a photo, grainy, printed from a cheap camera. It showed her sitting on a folding chair at the homeless shelter downtown, serving soup to a line of women and children. On the back, in neat cursive, she'd written, "You taught me to build, not destroy. I'm learning. Ruth." For the first time in months, tears came easily, not of sadness, but of peace. Later that evening, I called David. He answered on the second ring. "Kate," he said softly. His voice sounded steadier now, grounded, changed. "She sent me another letter," I told him. "I know," he replied. "She sends them to me too. She's different now, Kate, really different." "I can tell," I said. He hesitated. "I've been meaning to ask, how are you?" I smiled faintly, leaning against the hotel balcony. Lighter, freer, I think I finally understand the difference between fighting for love and forcing it. He exhaled. "I'd give anything to have another chance." "Then earn it," I said gently. "Start with yourself." That's what I had to do. There was silence, not heavy, just real. "Maybe one day," he said finally, "we'll build something new, not as who we were, but as who we've become." "Maybe," I replied. "One day." Back in Chicago, life found its rhythm again. My company flourished. New projects blossomed across continents. Investors called me the architect of grace, a nickname born from that viral moment and solidified by what came after it. But I never forgot where the journey started, on those cathedral steps, beneath a sky too bright for the ugliness that had unfolded below it. Every time I drove past that place, I paused, not to relive the pain, but to remind myself of the woman who walked away with her dignity intact. The same woman who learned that silence, when used wisely, can shake entire worlds. One afternoon, Leo walked into my office holding a folder. "We received another proposal," he said. "The city council wants to name one of our new community centers after you." I laughed. "Oh no, that's unnecessary." He grinned. "They said it's not about ego, it's about inspiration. The Kate Matthews Center for Resilience and Renewal." I smiled slowly. "Resilience and renewal," I repeated. "That's fitting, because that's exactly what I'd found. Weeks later, I attended the center's opening ceremony. The event was small, intimate, nothing like the glamorous galas Ruth used to host, but it was real. Kids painted murals on the walls. Women from low-income neighborhoods stood beside me, proud and unafraid. The music was laughter, not violins. And when I saw Ruth walk in, quietly, humbly, without fanfare, my breath caught. She'd aged 10 years in one, but her eyes were softer. She carried no pearls, no designer bag, just a bouquet of white lilies. She approached me slowly. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the flowers. "Of course." She placed them on the podium beside me and whispered, "I wanted to see what you built, without hate." Her voice trembled. Mine didn't. "Thank you," I said simply. And for the first time when our eyes met, there was no bitterness, only recognition. Two women who had both been humbled, one by pain, the other by grace. That evening, as I left the center, the city lights shimmered like a constellation of second chances. I thought about everything Ruth had said in her letter, about mirrors and truth. Maybe that was the real story all along. Not revenge, not victory, but awakening. Because sometimes the only way to silence cruelty is to let it hear its own echo. And sometimes the only way to heal is to forgive the person you never thought could change, including yourself. It's strange how silence can heal what words once broke. For months after the scandal, David and I spoke only through their short messages, polite, cautious, unsure. He'd ask about my projects. I'd ask about his work. We avoided the past like an old scar that still ached when touched. But time, patient as mercy, did its quiet work. One rainy afternoon, almost a year later, I was back in Chicago preparing for a presentation at the city's new cultural center when my phone rang. "Kate?" That voice, soft, hesitant. "David." "Hi," I said, keeping my tone light. "It's been a while." "I know," he said. "I heard about the award in London, the design initiative. I saw your speech. You were incredible." I smiled faintly. "Thank you." He hesitated. "Would you ever have coffee with me? Just coffee. No expectations." The old part of me wanted to say no. The healed part whispered, closure isn't always confrontation. So I said, "Yes, tomorrow. The cafe near Lincoln Square, 11 a.m. The next morning, I arrived early. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and rain. The window fogged with warmth. When David walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. The expensive suits were gone. He wore a plain shirt, sleeves rolled up, humility instead of arrogance. "Kate," he said, smiling. Small, real. "David." We sat. For a moment the air was awkward, thick with everything we hadn't said. Then he spoke first. "I'm sorry." I met his eyes. "For what?" "For not seeing you, for not standing up for you, for loving you quietly when I should have loved you loudly." He exhaled. "You were fighting battles I didn't even know existed, and I was standing on the sidelines, pretending it was normal." His words were honest, not rehearsed, not dramatic, just raw. I nodded slowly. "You were afraid of choosing between me and her." He swallowed. "I thought peace meant avoiding conflict, but I learned that peace without truth is just cowardice, dressed as calm." That line, that truth, landed deep. We talked for hours, about the years that had passed, the people we'd become, the things we both had to unlearn. He told me Ruth had changed, genuinely changed. She spent her weekends at the shelter, mentoring young women and funding scholarships anonymously. She says she learned that love isn't control, he said. It's respect and science. I smiled. Then maybe she and I finally agree on something. We laughed. Not the forced laughter of people pretending to move on, but the kind that comes when the storm is finally over. When we stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The pavement glistened like glass. David turned to me, unsure. Kate, I don't expect to rebuild what we lost, but if there's ever a way to start again, even just as friends, I'd be grateful. I looked up at the gray sky, soft and clean after the storm. Maybe friendship is where real love begins, I said quietly. He smiled, the same smile that had once lit up an art gallery and changed everything. Then I'll earn it, one day at a time. Over the next few months, we met occasionally. Coffee, long walks, quiet talks. There was no rush, no pretending. Just truth. Ruth joined us once, surprising me completely. She'd aged, but her spirit felt lighter. She hugged me for the first time. "Thank you for not letting me stay blind," she whispered. And for the first time, I hugged her back. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, not the kind where everyone forgets the pain, but it was real. David and I didn't remarry immediately. We built something better first: friendship, forgiveness, foundation. He volunteered at my firm's charity wing. I taught architectural workshops for underprivileged students. We both learned that rebuilding isn't about restoring what was lost. It's about creating what should have been there all along. One evening, after a charity gala, this time mine, not Ruth's, we stood outside under the city lights. David turned to me and said softly, "You know, it's ironic. The woman my mother once called a silly black thing became the reason I found faith again." I laughed. "Faith in what?" "In people," he said. "In change. In grace." I looked at him, the man who had once been my heartbreak and was now my peace. "Then I guess we both rebuilt something sacred," I whispered. "Not a house, not a marriage, just us." He smiled. Just us. The night wind carried the hum of the city, the soft rhythm of life continuing. And as I watched him disappear into the glow of streetlights, I realized something profound. Sometimes love doesn't need to return the same way it left. Sometimes it just needs to come back wiser. It's been 2 years since that day outside St. Regis Cathedral, the day my mother-in-law screamed, the day the limo arrived, the day silence spoke louder than hate. 2 years since everything fell apart and somehow came together again. The city has changed, or maybe I've just learned to see it differently. Every tower, every skyline I design now carries a small message etched into its foundation. Resilience is the architecture of the soul. Because I learned that real strength isn't about standing taller than those who tried to crush you. It's about building again on the same ground that broke you. Ruth visits sometimes now, always humbly, always with a purpose. She helps run a mentorship program at my Women's Design Center, teaching young architects about integrity and humanity, 2 things she once measured by pedigree. When I watch her kneel to guide a student's hand over blueprints, I sometimes wonder if God has a sense of humor. The woman who once said I didn't belong in her family now calls me daughter, and not out of obligation, but gratitude. We never talk about the cathedral anymore. We don't need to. That chapter wrote itself in stone. David and I, we found our rhythm again, not the desperate passion of the early years, but the slow, deliberate melody of 2 people who finally learned the music of respect. We remarried quietly last spring. No photographers, no headlines, just us, Ruth, and a handful of close friends in a garden filled with lilies. Her favorite flower, and now mine too. When I said my vows, my voice didn't shake, because this time I wasn't promising love out of hope. I was promising it out of understanding. Some nights, I still remember that moment, the insult, the silence, the limo door closing. But now, It doesn't sting. It reminds me that grace doesn't erase pain. It transforms it. That every humiliation can be repurposed into wisdom. That every broken thing can become a foundation. Because if you stay still long enough, you'll realize something miraculous. The ground that once rejected you can one day carry your legacy. I told that very thing to my students recently. We were standing on the rooftop of our newest project, a sustainable housing development named the Matthews Renewal Estate. A young intern asked, "Miss Matthews, what's the secret to success?" I smiled. "There is no secret," I said. "Just one truth. Never let anyone convince you that kindness is weakness. The quiet ones, the underestimated, the overlooked, the insulted, they're the ones who change the world." The students clapped softly, but I could see it in their eyes. They understood. Because in the end, my story isn't just about a mother-in-law or a limo. It's about what happens when you refuse to bow to hate, when you let success arrive without fanfare, like grace in motion. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline I helped design, Ruth stood beside me, her hands clasped. She looked out at the city and whispered, "I still think about that day." "So do I," said quietly. "But not with pain anymore." She smiled faintly. "You've forgiven me more than I ever deserved." "Maybe," I said. "But forgiveness isn't about what people deserve. It's about what you refuse to carry anymore." We stood there in silence. Two women once divided by pride, now united by redemption. As I drove home that night, my reflection caught in the car window, calm, sure, and at peace. It struck me how different I was from the woman Ruth once screamed at on those cathedral steps. Back then, I thought strength was proving myself. Now I know it's being myself. Back then, I thought revenge was power. Now I know forgiveness is. And as the city lights flickered around me, I smiled, whispering the final lesson life had taught me. You called me a fat, silly black thing once, Ruth. But now you know, the ground you stand on bears my name. And I don't say that with pride, but with peace. Because when grace walks in, even the ground beneath your feet remembers who built it. Moral of the story: never mistake gentleness for weakness, nor humility for lack of power. The quiet ones often own the ground beneath your feet. Stay humble, stay kind, and when the time comes, let your success arrive, not with noise, but with the quiet grace of a limo pulling up at the perfect moment.
You've come to the end of this love story, but another billionaire's secret is waiting. The next tale will be more seductive, more forbidden, and far more addictive. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Until then, guard your heart, because the Powder Room Tales is only getting started.